Hello, Kingdom Health. Welcome back. Today we are covering a very, very important topic and probably one of the most under-respected aspects when it comes to health, and that's sleep, but more importantly, rest. Okay, I need y'all to get excited right now because my guest today is going to help you discover and correct your rest deficiency. Sorry. And so I could spend just the entire hour talking about her amazing accomplishments, but I'm going to give you my best version of, the shorter version of her amazingness. So first things first, Dr. Saundra Dalton Smith is an author, speaker, board-certified internal medicine physician. She earned a BS in biochemistry at the University of Georgia and graduated with honors from Meharry Medical College. She has an adjunct faculty member at Baker College and Davenport University, teaching courses on health, nutrition, and disease progression. She is a national and international media resource on the mind, body, spirit connection, and a top 100 medical expert in good housekeeping, Doctor Secrets. And she's been featured in many, many media outlets, including Women's Day, Redbook, First for Women, MSNBC, Prevention, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and the Dr. Oz Show. So on top of all that, she's an author of several books. Most recent is Sacred Rest, and she shares all her tips on merging faith and medicine with over 16,000 healthcare professionals to encourage the current and next generations of doctors to treat the whole person. So wow. Dr. Saundra Dalton, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, happy to do it. Happy to be here.
Oh man, that was a mouthful. And I'm honored to be interviewing you. And I just want to start things off with, the basic question that I've been asking all the other guests here is, what does Kingdom Health mean to you?
Well, I think because for me, for a long time, I've always thought about science and medicine, science and really faith being separate. When I hear the term kingdom health, it really is the merging of the two. It's bringing the science and the faith, not having them be in opposition to each other, but actually coming together and working together for a more complete, total healing.
Awesome. And so what led you down this path of, sleep and rest education?
Honestly, the short answer is I burned out myself. So I got to a place in my own life and my own career where I was very active. My life looked very successful on the outside. It had all the fixings of success, but I was exhausted. I was tired. I had no joy, no peace. It was one of those situations where I got to the end of myself and I had to make a decision. Was I just going to continue as I was? Was that going to just be my new norm? And I think that's how many of us, if you're a high achiever and you have a tendency to burn it at both ends, you either make a decision, is this going to be my new norm? I'm just going to grind and stay exhausted, or am I going to make some necessary changes so that this life that I'm building and creating and working towards is actually a life I enjoy living, not just one that looks like it should be enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. Like, life has its twists and turns, and we kind of go down this path and this routine that over time can kind of start taking its toll on us mentally, physically, whatever that is. And for me personally, I reached that breaking point, which allowed me to finally just say, it's time to redirect. It's time to pivot. It's time to do something different. And within that, if you make that choice, there's so much growth and happiness that can come from that. So wonderful, wonderful story. And I guess I wanted to clarify for the audience here, because we all assume sleep is the same thing as rest. And so what is the difference between sleep and rest?
I think that's the problem I had too, because as a physician, you're kind of taught that they're almost the same thing. But the problem is, I think a lot of people will relate to this. What happens when you go to sleep at night and you wake up the next morning and you're still exhausted? Did sleep just not work for you? Are you the exception to the rule on, sleep's ability to fix all of our fatigue issues? that's where the whole concept that they can't be the same thing started to dawn on me, because that was my experience. Even when I tried to fix my exhaustion with more sleep, I wasn't feeling any more well rested. And so I started looking at really what is rest. And the very first thing is to realize is that rest really should mean restoration. If we're resting, we should come out of an experience of rest with some level of restoration in an area. And although sleep does hit many different areas, when we look at rest, a lot of my research, what it showed was that there are actually 7 main areas of rest, of which sleep kind of falls into the physical rest bucket. And even, with physical rest, it's more complicated than just sleep, because you have the passive physical rest, which are things like sleeping and napping. And then you also have active physical rest, which are things like yoga or stretching or leisure walking, where you're more focused on kind of improving the muscles and the tension and improving the circulation and the lymphatics. So really that's the big difference. When you just talk about sleep and you try to lump sleep and rest in this one big major category, you're really eliminating the other 6 types of rest and only focusing your attention on the passive type of physical rest.
Wow. Like that's kind of a mind-blowing thing for me, is like there's so many layers. Like just like how Kingdom Health Summit right here, we talk about health, but it's not just one thing. Like there's just so many layers that you have to kind of be aware of, so that you can make sure you're putting on that full armor, full protection, so that your body can be able to be healthy and strong and vibrant the way that God intended. So
Yes, absolutely.
with these layers, like there's so many active pieces, right? Like what percent of people do you find in your practice and patients that you work with that they have significant rest deficits? Is this a common thing?
Yes, it's huge, huge. So far, I have a study that I do, and it's an ongoing research where people are actually able to input to let me, so I can see their scores, to know what their rest scores are. To date, over 90,000 people have actually taken that assessment at restquiz.com, and out of the 90,000 people, there are maybe about 5% that had no rest deficits. So
Wow.
at least 95% had at least one. And honestly, about half of the people had severe rest deficits in 2 or more areas.
Wow.
That's why we're a burnout generation. That's why
Ex-
burnout is the norm. And really having a well-rested life for many is a bizarre concept.
Yeah, and the way that the world has changed, it makes it even harder to rest your mind, because there's something stimulating it, from our computers to our phones. Like that's wow. Okay. Like this is going to change my life right here just in this interview. So I'm just so excited for people watching. Like make sure y'all are taking notes, because we're going to dig deep. This is going to be some really like well-researched information. And one thing that I personally was wondering, like, so you mentioned like 95% of people have this deficit and they're just not even aware of it. Is there kind of like do you have some sort of ranking system? Is there one like right off the bat that, within that 95%, like most of them have, that they need to look out for? Like, is there a ranking system here that we can just start cutting to the chase, like cheat sheet to our fixing our deficits?
I wish there were. Honestly, it's like most areas of medicine. You have to self-diagnose. It's very individualized. Your rest deficits really relate to where you pour out in your life. So part of the assessment really helps people to dive into where are the areas in your life that you are expelling energy that maybe you're not aware that you're using energy, and that you're using part of your energy reservoir in that area. But the deficit comes when you're pouring out without any plan or strategy for restoring that area.
So being aware is key.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so now that it's kind of being brought to the forefront, and now we can kind of map it out in our heads, and it's easier to recognize it in our actual life. Like before I had, read up on your research and kind of the message that you're sharing, like I was going throughout my day, and I'm a mom of 2, where I was like, whoa, like now it explains why being with my kids all day and having all that energy and stimulation, like why I felt so fatigued. Even though I wasn't like running marathons, it felt like I was running a marathon, you know? So, what is something that everyone should kind of know about their rest habits that they probably overlook?
Well, I think it's just that. When are you feeling fatigue? One of the main things I have people start with when they tell me I'm tired all the time is what kind of tired are you? You know, and really that boils down to an understanding of the 7 types of rest. So I'll name them so that we can kind of just have a sense of what the other ones are other than physical. So we talked about the physical. You also have the mental and the spiritual. I think those are the 3 that the majority of people are at least aware of or familiar with. Then the 4 that are lesser known but are very huge areas where people tend to have deficits include the emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And so when we look at all 7 of them, depending on how your normal day-to-day activities look, will determine where you're actually pulling more energy. And then if you are not already doing things to actively restore them, those are the areas that you would run into a deficit.
Wow, yeah. So physical, so I'm trying to get a picture of a real life scenario for each category so that
Yeah.
for myself and the people watching can recognize it like today or tomorrow, like, oh, this is one of those rest areas that I need to pay attention to. So for physical, I'm assuming that's just like physical exercise and heavy lifting, like your body gets fatigued. Is that a good understanding there?
Well, it's not just physical exercise because some people have a physical rest deficit who are sedentary all day long. So think about it like this. If you have a physical rest deficit, you're the type of person who you may be someone who sits at an office desk. At somewhere in the middle of the day, your neck, shoulders start feeling tired and tense. You may start noticing swelling in your legs or your feet. What's causing that? Usually it's because of some body positioning, the ergonomics of maybe how you're sitting. It could include things like you're not actually practicing any type of flow break cycles. So you're staying in the same spot for long periods of time, which are affecting your circulations and your lymphatic drainage. So the rest deficit there is that things aren't being restored. That is the key. It's
Mhm.
restoration of whatever the area is that is being stressed and strained. And so, yes, construction workers and people with the hard manual labor jobs, honestly, they're the easy ones with the physical rest. They understand that, yes, I lifted a boulder, that was 100 pounds. I might need to stretch that bicep back out. What about the mom that's lifting a 50-pound child 10 times in a day? She's not
Mhm.
stretching anything. She's just tight and tense and sore and has a headache and doesn't know why.
Yeah, that explains a lot. I had big kids for some reason. They were my back threw out twice. So, yeah, so that's it. My husband is a software developer. And so like right away, like I was the athlete and he was kind of just the person on the keyboard. And I would have, previous to this, I never thought of him as being like overly physical, but now that I think about it, it's like he's on the computer, and if he slouched, like in
Mhm.
that scenario, like adding an ergonomic type chair or support on his body, would that be a solution to his repetitive physical state throughout the day?
Yeah, the thought process with reversing that or restoring that would be what we call body fluidity. So being mindful, first of all, if you're having muscle pain or back pain or wrist pain, to think about how your body's responding and when you're noticing that. So if you're noticing wrist pain after typing for an hour, maybe think about having a wrist support so that you're not developing carpal tunnel, or a back support, or even having a foot rest so that your spine is actually supported and the chair is properly positioning everything. Something else to keep in mind would be, there's lots of software now that'll remind you to practice flow break cycles where you flow or you kind of, as we say, get into a groove with working, and then you purposely take some breaks to go for maybe a walk, maybe to the fridge to get some water to get rehydrated, but you're moving and changing positioning. and you're just not kind of grinding through, which is what many people do at desk jobs. It's 2 o'clock, everything hurts. Rather than taking a few minutes and doing maybe a couple of neck stretches while you're sitting there at your desk to undo some of that damage, we just try to grind through it. And that's not necessary, because really a well-rested lifestyle isn't about taking a vacation. It's not about going to get a massage. Those are all great things and can all be beneficial. It's got to be a lifestyle. It's got to be something you can do in the middle of all that's going on in your life to keep you in a rested state.
Fascinating. I'm loving this. So, okay. So we have the physical. I have a good grasp of that. Now we get into the mental, which I think I have an idea of what that is. And,
Mhm.
that would be more of like the stress on your mind, overthinking, thinking of stuff throughout the day, worrying about like what could happen or something in the past. Is that a good kind of some good examples there?
It is. It is. Um, an example I would add to that would be someone who maybe lays down to go to sleep at nighttime, and instead of being able to kind of shut your brain down to go to sleep, you're thinking about your to-do list. You're checking off what you need to do the following day. Or you are kind of ruminating over a thought. Maybe somebody said something to you and it hurt your feelings. And so now you can't let it go. So you're ruminating over it. Or you're thinking about a conversation about what you wish you'd said or what you'd say if you had a chance to do it again. Those are all situations where the mind is going on this kind of negative feedback loop, and it's ruminating over the same thought, and it's not allowing that thought to let go so that you can get into those deeper levels of non-REM sleep that we need to really feel restored. So how do you break that? One very simple tactic is what we call brain dumping. So instead of just kind of letting your thought processes keep running around that loop, when you write it down on something concrete, that could, it doesn't have to be a journal or anything fancy. It could be a Post-it note for that matter. When you write that down, what happens is you break that feedback loop and you let your brain know that, okay, now this thought is safe and secure on something concrete. So your brain doesn't have to feel responsible for holding on to that thought, because unfortunately, and many of us know this, your brain will hold on to that thought all night at the expense of you sleeping, because it thinks it's so important and it doesn't want to let you down by forgetting that information.
Wow. Yeah, and that kind of ties into, I've been reading a lot of Neville Goddard's work, and he talks about that state akin to sleep, like right when you're about to go to rest or sleep,
Mhm.
what you think about or what your mind is tied to is really important, because that goes into your subconscious state and can rewire the next day before you even had a chance to wake up. So that's really interesting. And I wanted to kind of share my personal experience with, so my husband, before we go to sleep, like he's one of those people, he's very pragmatic. He's an engineer mind and his mind is always going. So what he usually does is he likes to watch a Netflix show before bed. So that lets his mind rest. But I have a feeling that that is not what is recommended before that's not really resting your mind. Am I correct there?
It may be entertaining. I'm not sure you can say anything necessarily got restored. Now, if he's watching something that, there's lots of different things on Netflix, depends on what he's watching. But if it's something that he feels like is inspirational to him or in some way kind of motivating him in some way, technically, I guess you could say maybe spiritually I got restored and that I got motivated in some way. But if it's more just to kind of zone out, which is what many people try to do with Netflix, is try to zone out, then being engaged with a TV show is not going to help you zone out.
All right. So then what would you recommend in that situation? So brain dump and then just have some positive prayer or affirmation or just kind of good good thoughts before falling asleep.
That's helpful, but for most people, that's difficult to do because their head's already full of stuff. So they're trying to, and even with brain dumping it, they brain dump, but they need something to focus on. They need kind of a central thing to focus on. And
Mm.
so for many people, I have them pick a word that is something that is soothing or that brings them some type of peace. And oftentimes for people of faith, I recommend picking a characteristic of God that they want to focus on. So it could be love, it could be peace, it could be joy, it could be hope, it could be faithfulness. It can be whatever they want it to be, but a single word that they're going to allow their brain to concentrate on. Because I mean, as an internal medicine physician, I get a large number of people who come into my medical practice in their 30s and their 40s, and they're saying things like, I think I have early dementia. And I'm like, okay, what makes you think, nobody in your family has that. So what makes you think you have, early dementia? And it's, well, I can't concentrate anything. I can't, I go in the grocery store and I got 3 items and I can't remember the 3 items. So I'm 35. Why can't I remember? Because your brain has lost the ability to concentrate on a single thought. It's so busy jumping from loop to loop to loop, from idea to idea to idea, that you have untrained it on how to go deep and to concentrate. And so that's a great way to actually start retraining the brain, is to meditate on the things of God. And sometimes it's just a single characteristic, not even the whole scripture. I love scripture memorization. I think it's great as a positive affirmation tool, to have your positive affirmations be scripturally based. But for some people who really have just busy brains, they really just need to pick one word and go deep on that.
I love that. Like, just keeping it simple. That's something you can't forget, right? Like, your favorite characteristics of God, that's always in your heart, and just keeping it simple to one word, like, that is so doable that, like, you don't have any excuse not to do that. So that ties into the next layer, the next deficit, right? Which is spiritual. So I had kind of like a little spiritual awakening, after having my kind of, layers on top of layers of life. And, but again, like, now that I'm becoming more aware, I realized how unaware I was as a Christian, growing up my whole life as a Christian. So can you kind of touch on the spiritual aspect that gets overlooked even by the people of faith that, try to be Christian and act in accordance with their, with God?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I lived here a very long time because, I went to church and I had Bible study. I mean, we led Bible study in my house. So I felt like, oh, I don't really need, I'm getting all the spiritual rest I need, like the Pharisees. I'm getting all the rest I need. I must not need any more. And so what I really started noticing when I started diving into the spiritual rest aspect of it is that it really isn't about religion. It really isn't about the study of the word and all of that. All of that's needed, obviously, but that's not what spiritual rest is really about. It's really about relationship. It's about intimacy with God, time with him. So it's about prayer, but it's not just those prayers where you're like rattling off your your to-do list, your to-want list, those kind of things. It's the prayer where you're actually spending time listening to what he has to say. It's a much deeper relationship than I think many of us are even comfortable with, because it opens the door for God to ask you anything. And that can be scary. If we're being honest, that can be really scary. And so when I share this with youth groups, one of the things that I found to be very, very helpful for them, because this whole concept of intimacy with God, when I mention it, I get these looks on their face like, what is she talking about? And so one thing that I started using as an example with them was, if you had a conversation with God by text today, what would you need that text to say to know that he really gets where you're at right now? And then I have them text that message to themselves. And when they see that, because that's how many of them communicate with their closest friends. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, oh, wow. That's what prayer and this communication and this intimacy with God is like. He can speak to the deepest part of my needs without me having to type it in. He's able to do that because he knows me that well.
Mm-hmm. And it's often simpler than we think. Like, me personally, I feel like it got overcomplicated, where I just assumed you had to be some priest, minister level of understanding of God to even be able to have that direct kind of like communication. And it wasn't until recently that I was like, wow, like God does speak to me. And like I have received that. And it did sound crazy to me before. Like I didn't know, like I thought it was just this metaphorical thing, but like, no, God is here. He's present and he's talking to us all the time. And now that I've switched that on in my brain, I can recognize it all over the place, where before I just kind of assumed coincidence, or I didn't make that connection as directly as I do now. So it's very exciting now. So with spiritual, it's relationship and consistency within yourself, and not necessarily just following guidelines, rituals, or repetition, just where it's very intentional and it's very personal
Yeah,
and very intimate.
absolutely. Exactly.
Awesome. So next we have, so the more obscure ones that often get overlooked in these rest deficits is the sensory. So can you just touch on that a little bit? Like some examples, like for me as a mother, I gave you that example, but what would be some real life examples that the average person here might be able to connect with?
Yeah, well, it's really anything that's involving your senses. We live in a sensory rich environment now, but from our computers to our smartphones to the lights and all that goes on with that. But for many people, what I have them kind of think about is just what their environment looks like. Is your environment full of loud sounds, bright lights? What are the smells that are even in your environment? If you are constantly exposed to a very sensory rich environment, then you are at risk for a sensory rest deficit. Um, some examples that I've seen specifically have been people who work in offices. I do a lot of talking really um, specifically related to going into corporations and giving talks regarding time management and being able to kind of improve their workforce by understanding how these 7 types of rest affect their productivity. And so in some of these corporations, when I show up and I'm kind of doing a quick kind of overview of their setting just to give a consultation, I'm seeing these cubicles where people they call them open desk space. So you may have 7 or 8 different people working together in one of these open desk space where you can hear the phones ringing, you can hear other people's conversations, you can hear every sound, every smell, all these lights. And these people tend to be extremely stressed. I tend to have horrible burnout percentages because when they're getting sensory overloaded at work, then they hop into their car and they turn on their radio or listen to a podcast. And so they're getting even more sensory overload. And then when they get home, many of them don't understand why they're so agitated and irritated. And that's the side effect of a sensory overload. And I think the problem with that is a lot of us don't really evaluate what our sensory inputs look like. I've also seen that with moms who are homeschooling or stay-at-home moms, and they're not aware that listening to high-pitched screaming and squealing and laughter all day can lead to sensory overload, as well as having little hands touch you all day can affect your desire to have big hands touching you later in the evening. And so there's a lot that plays into that, and it affects so many other areas of our life.
Yeah. And so like the whole mom tie-in, that definitely resonates with me. And like when you're talking about the sound with the children, it takes me back to my childhood. I grew up with 3 brothers. And so there were a lot of us, and my mom would always be like, we got to turn off the radio. It's too loud. Like she would have those moments where it was just you, and we're just like, Mom, it's just music. Like, why are you upset? Like, we just want to hear our favorite song. And it seemed like so harmless at the time. But now when you think about like this, when you think about all those layers, it's like, yeah, like she had a lot going on, and just that sound was just too much for her. And we, as young children couldn't understand. But now that we have you breaking down all this science and research, it's easier to understand. And now I'm glad I'm aware of it so that I don't fall into that same pattern. Right. So
Absolutely.
wonderful. So next we have the social category.
Yeah, social rest. I guess, well, the quickest way to kind of describe that is to describe what it isn't. Because when I say social rest, I think people automatically think of kind of getting away from other people. And that's not what social rest really looks like. When I think about social rest, it really has to do with having an understanding of how people pull on you. So there are people who pull on you negatively. Doesn't mean they're negative people. It just means that how they use your energy. And so your kids, your spouse, your elderly parents, all of these could be example of people who are negatively pulling on you. They require something from you. If you someone who works outside of the home, colleagues that you work with, co-workers, bosses, all of these people are pulling from you. They're requiring social energy from you. Positive influencers or people who are restful are those who actually pour back into you. Those are those adult friends that you can hang out with who don't want anything from you. They don't expect anything specific. They just enjoy being around you, and you enjoy being around them because their presence and their ability to kind of affirm who you are pours back into your life. And what we see is that as grown-ups kind of get more responsibility, kids and all these other jobs and all these other things going on, then they spend less and less time with their adult friends, which means they have fewer opportunities for social rest.
Yeah, like when I was just had my kids, and I was just there by myself. Like I did feel that distance. So what you're recommending is not to just isolate yourself. Just make sure you are being selective with the energies and people that you're around. And one thing that I think of is I've kind of gone down different little rabbit holes in researching all these health aspects. And, when it comes to physical presence and people's energies, like I had come across this researcher who was talking about the biophoton fields and kind of the electromagnetic like that radiates energy that radiates from our hearts, and they've seen that your emotions are tied to those particles and that they change and that those particles can interact with other people's particles. And so it's not just this, hippie, like let's have good vibes, like just that piece of it, but there's actually physical science and physical particles that are interacting within people, and where their heart's at can determine how those particles interact with the other person and with you. So yeah, I just find it very fascinating. And have you kind of touched on any of that aspect of it, the biophotons, or any of the actual energies that are around us?
Absolutely. And I think that's an important thing to discuss because specifically, and when we start talking about those kind of things, a lot of people are like, isn't that kind of new agey? There's a lot of stuff that's attached to that people have misconceptions with, but really it's the science. And as I
Mm-hmm.
stated, all science originated with God. So we have to kind of look at, now people use it in different ways, but the science has, the science itself is just that. It's just the information. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I find a lot of times with social rest is that many people really have to get an understanding for kind of how presence affects them, because there's power in presence. And
Mm-hmm.
so for some people, they may not have the opportunity to be physically present with someone. There, in my case, my two best friends are across the country. I'm on the East Coast, one's on the West Coast, the other one's in Canada. So once a year we get together for a girls' retreat, but I can't just wait once a year to get social rest. So what we do is we actually meet via Skype every month for an hour-long kind of hangout session with each other. And we chose that specifically because we can see each other's mannerisms. We can see, if someone's crying or if someone's laughing, or someone kind of gives a funny look, we can see all of that. So we
Mm-hmm.
can get the power of presence even if we're not physically in the same room with each other. And I think that's an important thing to understand, because a lot of times I'll have people say, well, my friends aren't close, or as you stated, I'm a mom, I don't have babysitters to come let me go hang out with my friends all the time. You don't physically have to always be in each other's presence to experience each other's presence.
Yeah, and I think we're all learning that lesson right now because of quarantine. So it's interesting how our lives are naturally shifting, and we're going outside of our normal actions, and we're getting creative. And I think there's going to be a lot of growth that happens with that. And so the next, we have two more layers here, but the most important piece that I kind of took away from that last part was like just being the aware of the power of presence.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
my audio kind of cut out there, sorry. So the power of presence of the person you're with and the one that you're giving off. So awesome. Now we have creative. So is that, I think of myself as a creative person. I like to do a lot of things. And with this summit, I'm creating a lot of content. So how does that play in into this space?
Well, that's a part of it, but I also want people to realize that even if they don't consider themselves a creative, that they are likely using creative energy, because just having to come up with innovative thoughts requires creativity. If you're a business owner and you're having to come up with marketing ideas or new ways of getting your product in front of people, if you're a teacher and you're having to figure out lesson plans so that your audio learner as well as your visual learners can both benefit. If you're a mom and you're trying to figure out how to cook and keep your child from climbing the wall, you're having to be creative. So there's creative energy that's expelled in multiple ways, even for people who traditionally would not consider themselves to be creatives. And what creative rest is the rest that occurs when we allow ourselves to appreciate beauty and to allow that to awaken an awe and wonder and inspiration inside of us. I
Wow,
guess
I
the
love that.
easiest example of that, when I think about it, the easiest example, and probably the one with the most research, has to do with people who, when they go to the beach or bodies of water, they automatically just feel better. They can't explain it. They can't, they don't really understand why they feel better outside or in nature. That's what creative rest looks like. You're allowing yourself to appreciate the beauty or the experience of that, whether it's God made like nature and the ocean, or man made like going to the museum for an artist. So it's not creating more beauty, because that's actually creative work. So painting a picture or writing a poem, all of those are creative work. You're actually withdrawing from your own creative pool. Creative rest is when you're letting other creative work create something inside of you and to restore your creative energy.
Ooh, I love that. So that's, yeah. And so being aware that everyone has their own form of creativity, right? It's not just the artist or the musician or the people that do all this like visually creative stuff. It's like everyone's
Mhm.
creative in their own way. And it's funny, it's interesting you mentioned the beach because yeah, there's a lot of layers of therapeutic value that it has. And I had never thought of this one. So I had, researched like the active bodies of ocean like emit negative ions into the air, which neutralizes the positive charges in our body. And there is a grounding effect that the ground gives to help ground and give us healthy, a healthier experience when we're out in nature. But I never thought of that you're getting your rest, the proper creative rest. That it's just so obscure. I never would have even thought of that. So wow, like those, the beach has a lot of layers we need to start tapping into. So so now we have the last one, which is emotional. So I was always someone who didn't like to be emotional. Like I would refuse to cry in front of people and I didn't like to share things. So I'm curious what that means for someone like me who's tries to hide it all.
Well, that's really what emotional rest is. It's the opposite of that. uh, because and that's how I was really for a very long time. So, the whole concept of emotional fatigue comes oftentimes when you're trying to hold things in. I find that a lot of people, it comes when they are trying to do kind of people pleasing type activities, or if they, as I say, have their professional mask on. As a physician, there's a level of professionalism that's expected of me. And sometimes that professionalism actually has a physical toil attached to it, because think about it this way. My friends kind of know that I have a tendency to be a bit of a jokester. I'm goofy, I'm funny. We just kind of have a great time and laugh. So when they see me in my professional setting, they're like, you're not really the same person. But can I be? Does anybody want me cracking jokes in the ICU when someone's grandfather's dying on the table? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just not, I mean, I have to kind of rein all of that in and be somebody that is expected in that setting. And there's a stress to that. And I find that a lot of people who are in similar type jobs, I treat a lot of attorneys and CEOs and CFOs and C-suite staff, and I find that they have a very similar professional mask, so to speak, that they wear, because they're not going to just be their normal selves, so to speak, as they would if they were just hanging out with their friends. And so there's a stress associated with that. So you have to undo that stress with emotional rest, which is basically having opportunities to be fully authentic, to not have the mask on, to take the mask off, to just be fully yourself. And I think kind of the best example to model of that, not that Jesus ever had any mask on, so to speak, but when you look at the life of Jesus, you see that he had times when he was with the multitudes. You see he had deeper experiences with the 12, and then you see he had extremely deep revealing times with three, like on the Mount of Transfiguration, where he, was first revealed kind of who he really and truly was. I think our lives need to have very similar layers where, there are people that are the multitude who see a part of our truth, but maybe not the whole truth. And then we have those select few that we really allow to see all of us.
Wow. And it's interesting because this year, that was my inspiration to act in accordance with that this year, is just kind of like, I'm just putting it all out there, all of my truths, all of my being, like, I'm just, this is me, and whoever like resonates with that, I want them to be, that's how I'm kind of like attracting like-minded people. And it's has this cascading effect of where you just let it all out, like you feel so much better, but then other people that are going to help you feel better get drawn to you as a result. So yeah, like I think this is, wow, like all these layers, like I would have never thought about all of this. So how did you go? Like, I love to research, like that's been my thing with healing my husband, but how did you go about like coming to this conclusion and researching all of this to develop this like very intricate system of understanding the way the body works and rests?
Well, it's just that research. I'm a biochemistry major, specifically, so I have a tendency to want to kind of take the big picture and break it down into the tiny bits that make it up. So that's kind of my natural way of approaching things. And so then I just started doing the research, starting to look at the different components of rest. And because I felt like there was really a underlying scriptural part of it, I spent a lot of time in the Word trying as the initial place where I started with the research, because the 7 types of rest was really birthed out of Genesis, and looking at kind of the specifics of when is rest even first mentioned in the Bible. In the Word, the whole concept of rest kind of comes in the creation story. Man was created on the 6th day. God rested on the 7th day. During the writing of my book, Sacred Rest, God had me really sit in Genesis for a very long period of time, over a year, staying in that one book. And I really had a hard time kind of reconciling, why do I not feel released from this one book? I'd done the research at that time, so I already knew to some degree what the 7 types of rest were. And so what came out of that time of really staying in Genesis, God had me go back to that 6th day when man was created. The animals were created first, then man was created. And then it said God rested. Well, it never dawned on me, what was man doing while God was resting? because it doesn't talk about men working until the next chapter. And so when I was sitting there and I was reading that, I was like, God, all of my life, I've thought of this concept of I need to work to earn my rest, which when I look at the scriptural way that you laid this out, you created man, then you gave them a mandate, you told them who they were, what their job was to do, and then you didn't tell them to go work. You put them in a full day. So their first day wasn't even a full day because they came after animals. So their first full day on the earth was simply in your presence, resting.
Wow.
And from that, they went and did to work. So I spent all of my life thinking I had to work to earn my rest, when really what God's plan was that I work from a place of rest, that I start with understanding who I am, let him pour into me, restore my mind, body, spirit, every aspect of who I am, so that when I start the work, I'm not working out of my own strength, but I'm actually working out of his.
Wow. That is mind blowing right there. Like that, I mean, yeah, like we've all heard that story of the Bible, like the book of Genesis. That's like, I went to a Christian school like that. We knew that book, but when you look at it from that different lens, it's like, like, wow, like that is just so, yeah, first things first, rest, get restored. And that's going to help prepare you to work better and work more in line with your true purpose and what God has sent you here for. So, wow, like that's amazing. So, with this, this wisdom that you're acquiring, especially like the Bible has so much, and like God kind of led me towards the book of Daniel and all these things. And there's so much that's taken from it. How did, you're a medical doctor, like how did some of your colleagues take to this new type of information as you were developing it?
Well, you know what? That's the thing. I think medicine at this stage, I think the medical community at this stage understands burnout more than anybody. So,
That's true.
we start in residency teaching, young doctors as they're just getting started that, it's no problem to work 50, 60 hours a week, grind it out, suck it up, buttercup, get it done, So that's kind of how we train doctors. And so we're training them to think that rest is not necessary. And then what I see is where I'm called in most of the time now in my current line of work is to grand rounds. Honestly, this is a true scenario. The last couple of invites I've gotten from hospitals were after massive physician suicides on their campuses, 2-3 doctors within like a 4 or 5 month period. And so I'm being called in as kind of cleanup crew, because now they need someone to teach them how to take care of themselves, to teach them how to have some type of quality life and still practice medicine. And so the medical community now has been extremely receptive of this message, because they're seeing actually what happens when you burn out, when you don't allow your body and your mind and your spirit and every other aspect of you to be restored. And I think it's sad that it had to come to that. I think it's sad that that's where it had to get to before we started respecting that the place rest should have in our lives. But I think that's what needed to probably happen for people to start paying attention to how our medical community was being treated.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what it takes, a tragedy. And like we referenced earlier, this pandemic, like, yes, there's tragic moments, but there's also a greater good that comes from it, and growth and development that happens. So like, I mean, doctors, that's kind of a common story. Like there's just so much on their plate, and there's a certain idea that they have to, be a certain way. And I mean, not everybody's a doctor, but everyone can relate to that, where it's like people become too concerned about like what people might think of them if they do rest. And I had to kind of deal with that when during my second pregnancy, I was on bed rest. And so like, I was forced to just not do anything. And like, I kind of felt bad because I was just like, I just feel like this useless thing over here. Like everyone has to like cater to me, like, which normally it should have been nice, but there's that mental struggle perception and one worrying about other people, when it's like, you just got to focus on yourself. So how would you recommend the average person kind of take action for themselves to make that shift in attaining more real rest?
Well, you have to have some personal boundaries. And I think that's difficult for many people because, by nature, boundaries must be confrontational. I mean, that's what a boundary is. It's a confrontation line. And so I think it's important for most people to really start getting real with themselves about what type of personal boundaries you need to erect so that you can get the rest that you need. That means you have to confront any kind of people pleasing behavior. If you're saying yes because you're afraid that someone can't accept your no, it's probably important to evaluate that relationship, because you shouldn't be forced to give an untruthful no when your heart is saying, or, untruthful yes, I should say, when your heart is saying, no, this is not right for me in this time or in this season.
Yeah, so we got to keep it real, y'all, in a respectful way, right? Like, you just have to be honest and open and just know you can't please everybody. One of the things that I did want to talk about is you have this amazing rest quiz on your website, restquiz.com, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that I do want to remind the viewers here is that that's one of your action items for this layer of protection. Is I want you guys taking this quiz and starting to dig deep into your, what does your rest look like? Where are areas that you can improve? And can you just give us give the viewer a quick idea of what they can expect from this 15-minute analysis that you offer for free on your website? It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I should say, I tell people it should take between 5 to 10 minutes. It's a lot of questions because it's very thorough. Because I could give you a kind of a quick 1 second click off two things. Let me tell you what your rest deficits are, but it wouldn't be as accurate. And so it takes about 5 to 10 minutes. I always say, don't overthink the questions. Answer them as things truly are, not as you wish they were, so that you can get a actual reflection of where your rest deficits are at. At the end, you get an email that shows you which of the 7 types of rest you're most efficient in. It actually will tell you your score in all 7 types of rest, as well as include some information about what the different types of rest are, so that you can kind of be reminded of, oh yeah, so I'm deficient in social rest. What exactly is that again? So that you can remember those things.
Amazing. So you can take that quiz and then also rewatch this video to understand, now that you've had your scores in the different rest areas. Like, I took your quiz, and now that I have this better understanding, I'm like, ooh, let me go look back at my score and understand it better. And that way I can take action, and the changes will just happen more instantly. And yeah. So before we transition into, I do want to do a little talk on the whole pandemic situation. But before we close out with this first segment, I wanted to see if were there any other biblical scriptures or chapters or just things that inspired this plan on top of the Genesis that you had mentioned, which is just amazing, like mind blowing here. Anything else that can just blow my mind?
Oh, I think the scripture that really the entire book was written around was a scripture. Well, the entire book of Isaiah is my favorite. My youngest son's actually named Isaiah because I just love every aspect of that book. But it was while I was reading that book where the whole idea of I need to reevaluate rest. And it was from Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15, where it says, "In returning in rest shall you be saved, and quietness and trust shall be your strength." And it ends with the statement, "But you would have none of it." And I think that was a wake-up call for me, because I did. That was what I was living. I would have none of it. I felt like resting was for lazy people and for people who just, didn't have it together as I did. So, if you were able to push through, you should push through. And for those who couldn't keep up, well, too bad for them. Until, I got to a place where really God just showed me just how a restless life looked like, how miserable it could get, and how low it could make me feel. And I think in that moment, really, I think I hit my worst point of my burnout when I picked up my kids from daycare one day. I set them on in front of the TV. I called it my electronic babysitter at the time. And I laid out on my foyer floor just with tears streaming down my face. And I said, God, if this is it, I don't want to be here anymore. I wasn't, I didn't have a suicide plan. I didn't feel particularly depressed. I just didn't like the life that I was building. And that's the thing that kind of dawned on me. And I felt like the Holy Spirit was saying, this is the life you built. And if you could build it, you can rebuild it. And so that's when it kind of, and I started diving into this chapter where it says, you wouldn't have it my way. You wouldn't do it my way. So this is what you built. Let's try to build something new.
Wow, that I love that. So, but you would have none of it. And so that's, I mean, such a great message just in all areas of life. It's like you're given these options and God drops all these little breadcrumbs for you along the way. But if you're not actively paying attention and you're in this sleepwalking state, you just kind of reject everything that's put on your plate. So even when it comes to health, like there's certain nuggets and certain pieces that were given along the way. And in my personal experience, my husband and I, we kind of rejected some of it. And then that diagnosis, we're like, wake up call, time to shift gears. God, we're sorry we didn't listen. Now let's act in accordance, So yes, very fascinating. So next, with this summit, I do want to tie in kind of the whole pandemic situation and quarantine that we're in. And prepare people so that when they go out and re-socialize again, appropriate socializing, what are the key things that people should understand within this situation, and how does sleep and rest fit into this?
Yeah, well, I think right now it's very interesting because we're all at home. So a lot of us, I think, thought, well, if I had a job where I could stay home all day, it'd just be awesome, and I'd just be so well rested, and life would be so great. And now we're living it, and it's like I'm still exhausted, so tired. And I think that's the thing, because rest isn't about cessation of activity. It's not about just being home or working from home. It's being very intentional about restoring whatever has been depleted. And so, in the situation where people are staying indoors and not really having to go out and expel a lot of energy, they can still be restless if they're not restoring the places where they're expelling energy. And then with their sleep, you'll find that it's very difficult to sleep if you are missing rest in a specific area, because if it's physical, your body's going to ache. You lay down to go to sleep and you're like, why am I uncomfortable? Why is my neck hurting? If it's, sensory, you'll lay down and all of a sudden you'll feel kind of agitated. Your body will be kind of overly irritated. If it's mental, you can't get your head to shut up and turn off. If it's creative, when you're trying to go to sleep, but you don't feel motivated or inspired by life. So it's just kind of like, you feel listless. So, in all these different areas, they affect your ability to sleep. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that, they're not sure why they are exhausted and they can't get the sleep that they need.
And then do you think the whole state of the media and kind of that fear that's kind of created within that, and all these unknown situations, it puts people in an even different place than they normally would have been? So during this pandemic, like, how would you recommend people find that peace to be able to, so they don't fall into the panic and they don't cascade into deeper deficits within the rest?
Absolutely. Well, number one thing is to turn the media off sometimes. I think it's important to stay informed, but there's a difference between staying informed and then staying kind of overstimulated by the media. So I think maybe once or twice a day, get a little kind of kind of catch up on whatever's going on in the media, find out what new things are happening, or maybe what new stuff's going on in your state or in the country, and then turn it off for a while, and then maybe check back again later that day. So, but the thing is, you don't want to have ongoing news and reports kind of all day long. The same way we shouldn't really be checking our social media accounts all day long. We are not hardwired to be able to consume other people's lives 24/7. We don't have the emotional or mental capacity for that. And so you end up becoming fatigued in these areas because we were never meant to really have that level of social consumption.
hmm And so, with the media and all the research that you've done on sleep, is there anything that has been misrepresented that we should be aware of and not caught in the fake news?
Regarding sleep or
Yeah,
COVID?
regarding sleep, because you've
Oh,
done most of that's kind of your expertise. So I would love to know if like we've been tricked in a certain way that we should be aware of.
well, as far as tricked, I think the thing that really, I don't know if it's really being tricked, but I guess the thing that comes to mind automatically is when people say, "Well, get your 8 to 9 hours and you'll feel great the next morning." That's a lie. You
Mm,
know, you
yeah.
can get 8 to 9 hours and still be feeling exhausted the next morning. If you have an emotional rest deficit, sleep's not going to fix that. If you have a social or a sensory or creative rest deficit, you can get 50 hours of sleep. You're still going to feel fatigued because the fatigue is not coming from a lack of sleep. It's not a physical level of fatigue. It's coming from a deficit in a different area. And so that's why I think you have people who may only get 5 hours of sleep a night and they feel perfectly great. That's where they thrive because we've really kind of kept pushing this amount of sleep people need to larger and larger numbers of hour because so many people state they're tired all the time. I always say that, we have spent a lot of energy talking about a sleep revolution when we really need to start refocusing our attention to a rest revolution. How do we
Mhm.
get the rest we need so we can actually sleep better?
Wow. Yeah, I agree completely. And that it's funny because we try and fit everybody into this one cookie cutter, and we're all in different areas mentally, physically, like all these layers play a factor. And yeah, so start being aware of this. And lastly, like, so resting is ultimately a very important layer of protection within this pandemic. Like, that's just obvious, especially with everything we've discussed today. So for our listeners who are ready, they're super excited like I am, they want to take action and like, what can I do today? What can I do right now? Like, what would you recommend as kind of the top 3 things they could do to improve their rest right now?
Well, it really depends on specifically where their deficits are at. But given the fact that the majority of people, when I take a look at their scores, the number one area that people are deficient in across the board is creative rest. And so if you can't go outside, I know if you're in the country somewhere where, you're allowed to go outside of your house still, go outside, get some fresh air, enjoy the sun, look at the flowers, look at the trees, put your feet in the grass, enjoy some creative rest. If you're stuck in your house because of whatever reason, maybe you're not allowed to go outdoors right now because of everything that's going on, creative rest, the studies show that, particularly if you're someone who benefits from or feels kind of that rejuvenation from the ocean, the studies showed that actually looking at pictures of the ocean created a very similar sense. So change your lock screen on your phone, on your computer, to something that looks like those settings that rejuvenate you, so that you at least start getting some of those benefits. Even the aqua colors, just having some of those scenes on your phone or computer could help with that creative rest. A second area that many people are deficient in, when I look at those numbers, tends to be social rest. And so make sure that you're connecting with people. We're told to have social distancing, but really what they're talking about is physical distancing because you don't need to be socially distant. That's going to be detrimental to your emotional health as well. So, and your mental health. So you want to make sure that you're still having opportunities to experience the presence of other people. So things like Zoom or Skype or what is it called? What's It app or Marco Polo or all of these different things that you can connect with family and friends. So even if you can't physically be with them, you can still see them and experience their presence. And then the third type of rest that tends to be very high level of deficiency has to do with sensory rest. Turn the TV off. Don't use the cell phone at the dinner table. look in each other's eyes. We've gotten to become a generation, particularly teens, where no one looks each other in the eye. We're all looking at our phones. You didn't fall in love with your spouse by looking at your iPad or looking at the TV. You fell in love face to face. Let's get back to some eye to eye contact and that emotional rest that comes from being able to just be very open and real and intimate with other people, and to be able to share your truth, so that you're not living behind a mask and wondering what if they knew. They will know. Those that are closest to you should know, and you'll be able to understand that they still love you just as you are.
I love that. And the eye contact, that's such an important piece where we've got a society that just stares at something else besides each other. Is there, like, I'm just curious, like, is there research on like eye contact? Like when people are gazing in each other's eyes, like what happens? Like, I'm just curious, what have you come across?
As far as the chemicals, I don't know specific chemicals that are released, but regarding the relationship part
Mhm.
of it, what we're finding is that a lot of the studies are showing that we are really raising up a generation that is uncomfortable with eye contact. All of the social media and texting and all of the things that are now done online makes it very easy to kind of remove our human connection that comes with eye contact. We talk about cyberbullying and things like that. It's very hard to say some of the things you see people say online face to face. And I always wonder, would they even say that to someone's face? Because if they did, they could see how their words inflict pain. They could see kind of the wounding that happens from the words. And so those things weren't an issue in the past, that are now a big issue now, because we've gotten to the point where that eye contact and that feeling of being kind of connected with humanity that comes with eye contact gets really kind of dissipated when everything becomes electronic.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So what is the major difference between Dr. Dalton Smith today versus Dr. Dalton Smith maybe 10 years ago?
Wow, let's see. 10 years ago would have been before. That's a very interesting question.
Right.
10 years ago would have been before I'd ever written even my first book. This is my, Sacred Rest is my third. So that would have been the Dr. Dalton Smith who had um, two kids, who were just getting, actually one child that really was just getting started with everything, just figuring out medicine. I think the biggest thing was that Dr. Dalton Smith would have never thought about standing on stages. I was insecure, afraid, didn't know who I was, had no identity in Christ, thought my identity would be wrapped up in that white coat. God had to break me free of that. Thought that I would be able to kind of hide behind some of the science and not really have to dive deep in my faith. God had to break me free from that. So it was a very different person. She did not know who she was in Christ, so she did not have the boldness to actually be different. And it would have been a shame had she never found herself, because now when looking back on things, and the emails I get, the letters that I get, the when I get mail from husbands that say, God, my wife and I, we were on the verge of divorce, but we did something that you suggested, just in spending some time face to face with each other, asking the question, how is your day, and refusing to let the other person give a I'm fine answer, but really requiring them to think about it and answer it. That it saved our marriage. Simple things, not something that was, groundbreaking in itself, but just that someone had the audacity to say, let's get back to some of the basics and learn how to take care of ourselves by resting well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And thank God you listened, and you had within 10 years all these layers of freedom and peace just like covering you. And it's, it just radiates from you. And so it's so inspiring just to see that. I mean, 10 years like that, you've done a lot in those 10 years. I love it. Like, wow, you are amazing. So how can people that want to learn more about you, want to get your book, how do they just dive all in on Dr. Dalton Smith?
Yeah, well, my website is ichoosemybestlife.com. Really, it comes from Deuteronomy. I set before you life and death. Choose life so that you and your family may live. So that's what the website's based off of. But it's ichoosemybestlife.com. And my book, Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, is available at all the bookstores, Amazon, Lifeway, Walmart, Target. You pick your area, but it's available wherever books are sold.
Awesome. So you guys go out, get that book, and also don't forget your homework. Take that quiz, restquiz.com, and we're about to unlock some really amazing health layers for you. So I just want to thank you, Dr. Dalton Smith. It's been an honor just to pick your brain a little bit. It's absolutely fascinating. And I just want to wish everybody else here that's watching a wonderful, restful day. Take care.